Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Bellevue Literary Press Fête. Hi, Erica.
Hi, Andrea.
We're so excited to have everyone here with us this evening. My name is Andrea Louie, and I'm a proud board member of the press. And I'm joined tonight by our wonderful publisher and editorial director, Erica Goldman. I'm so sorry we can't be together in the same room with our sparkly drinks. Oh, and I see you have one too, but yes, and I invite everyone to bring whatever beverage or goodies make them enjoy this time even more with us this evening. First of all, I really want to thank everyone for being here, really from the bottom of our hearts, because we don't take your presence here lightly. So thank you very much for that. Second of all, I want to ask everyone to join me in giving a big round of applause to Natalie Hodges and her sister Eloise for that stunning performance at the Bach Concerto that opened up our evening tonight. It was just really spectacular. And I know we're going to hear much more from Natalie later this evening, so I'm really excited to hear what she has in store for us. Oh, and before I forget, all the bios and more information about all the speakers is on our website. Is that correct?
Yes. All the information you might desire is on the website about their books, our authors, their books, and their bios.
That's fantastic. So I invite everyone to switch over there and take a look if you'd like to learn more about our speakers this evening. So, all right. I wanted to share with everyone a little bit about my own journey to the press, which just really came through the New York City literary community. I'm a writer and arts advocate, and I'm also the former executive director of the Asian American Arts Alliance. And currently, I've been working at the Nassau County Department of Health. And one of these days when we're in person, we'll talk more about how a writer ended up at the front lines of a global pandemic. But that's for another time. But tonight, I really want to share with you that really what draws me to the press is its central mission, which is to publish works at the intersection of the arts and sciences. You know, because for me, this is just really a rather magical realm where we can just really surface more about what it means to be human and what it means to be in the world together. My father was a scientist, and I thought a lot about my father when I was reading the press's spectacular book, The Bear, which some of you may know about. And we will be hearing more from that author, Andrew Crevack, later this evening. But The Bear, if you don't know about it yet, is a novel that's set in the future. And it's about a father and a daughter, and they're the last two people on the earth. And there's this wonderful passage when the father is teaching this little girl how to read and how to write. And what really captures her imagination is when her father reads to her. I just want to share these few sentences with you, which I was really taken by. When he was finished and had blown out the candle, she would always ask, as though making sure she was back in her own world. These others, they're gone too? Yes, he would say, for a long time now. And we're alone? The little girl would ask. Not alone, her father would say. We have each other. So as we're coming here together tonight to celebrate the press, I really invite all of us to hold Andrew Crevack's words in our hearts about how we have each other, because it's really through your generosity and your support that the press is even able to be and to bring the words of not only the authors we're sharing tonight, but so many wonderful and spectacular writers into the world. So with that, I'd really like to turn this program over to Erica, who's going to talk about some of the authors who will be sharing their presence with us this evening. Erica?
Thank you, Andrea. Well, Andrea, you've already, in a sense, introduced Andrew Krivak, whose debut novel, The Sojourn, was published by BLP, and his most recent novel, The Bear, was also published by us, The Bear, which you quoted from, and both of them have earned distinguished awards and accolades. He'll be followed by John McWhorter, a prolific author whose Talking Black was published by BLP, and whom many of you may know from his TED Talks, his popular podcast, Lexicon Valley, and his many media appearances. And then we're so pleased to feature Natalie Hodges, also mentioned by Andrea moments ago, who will be reading from her debut work of nonfiction, on Uncommon Measure. Natalie is a rare talent, not only a beautiful writer, but a virtuosic violinist. Over to you, Andrew.
Good evening. My name is Andrew Crevack, and I'm the author of The Sojourn, the Bear, and the forthcoming novel Like the Appearance of Horses, all books published by Bellevue Literary Press. I was first introduced to Bellevue 11 years ago when I was looking for a publisher for my debut novel, The Sojourn, after 33 trade presses had passed on the manuscript. My agent told me if I was certain this book had to get published, then I was going to have to turn to the independents, those not-for-profit publishers looking for diamonds in the rough. I called up Bellevue on the phone, and Erica Goldman answered, and I asked her if they were still considering manuscripts for submissions. She said they were, and asked me what I had. So I told her about the novel, about my grandfather, about the war he fought in, and about the difficulty I was having placing the manuscript in the trade presses. Andrew, she said, I know exactly what you're going through. I used to see that every single day when I was working at the trades. Send me your novel. So I did. And 2 weeks later, Erica wrote back and said she'd loved it. She was passing it along to Dr. Lowenstein, but she was certain he would love it too, and she wanted to acquire it for Bellevue, if publishing with Bellevue was what I wanted to do. I said yes. Less than a week later, a small book called Tinkers won the Pulitzer Prize. The New York Times called Bellevue Literary Press a gatekeeper. I emailed Erica immediately to congratulate her, but also to say, are you sure you want to publish Sojourn in light of this newfound success? She said, absolutely. It was as if she knew exactly what it was she was doing. In May of 2011, The Sojourn launched. And after a quiet summer, in September of that year, it was announced as a National Book Award finalist. The next year, I won the Dayton Literary Peace Prize for fiction, the inaugural Chautauqua Prize, and showed up on more than a few shortlists for fiction. The Sojourn was a success. But let's talk about this idea of success in the world of publishing, especially when the word literary is the reason why a publishing house is putting books into the world. Sales numbers, prizes, great reviews garnered, these all go into the making of a successful book. But there's something else that matters almost even more. That journey from blank page to award-winning novel has to do as much, if not more, on the house, the publishing house, and the care, attention, and support it gives the writer every step of the way, because the publishing house is on a journey too. For the trades, the trade presses that want to make a profit, that's the journey, profit, plain and simple. I had a former editor tell me once that I should never forget that publishing happens at the intersection between commerce and art, and always closer to commerce. If I wrote books that didn't sell, eventually I wouldn't be able to call myself a writer, and wouldn't, because I wasn't a success in the commercial world. But I ask you, in all the things you do, isn't it at that place, that very difficult and very human place, where we put our heart and soul, with sometimes a little more than hope in front of us, into the thing we love to do and the work that we believe in? That is a success. If you believe in the work you do, then you can call yourself a success. Bellevue Literary Press understands that. Bellevue Literary Press is a success because of the confidence it gives the writers to express their style, their voice, and their story, because they believe in them and because it's work they love to do. Bellevue Literary Press is a success because of its editor, who understands that, yes, publishing happens at the intersection between commerce and art, but always it should lean towards art, because that's what she believes in, and that's the work she loves to do. Success at Bellevue Literary Press is in the editorial team that works unsparingly to put books out into the world that are fine and professional and beautiful, because that's what they believe in, and that is the work they love to do. Success at Bellevue Literary Press is in the publicist, who gets every book into every hand and on every shelf that she possibly can, because these are books she believes in, and this is work she loves to do. They call the place where publishers work a house, and I've been associated with more than a few of them, and I'll tell you, there's only one house where I've ever wanted to be at home, and that is Bellevue Literary Press, because they know and they believe in the work that the writers they have love to do. My friends, Bellevue Literary Press is an unqualified success and has been in the publishing world for a long time. You don't have to look too far or listen too closely to hear the reverence that's held for Erica Goldman and her editorial team at Bellevue because of the fact that they stick to the mission of art in the publishing world. That's why I'm speaking to you tonight. We need your support in order to keep writing, to keep publishing, to keep doing what no other house in the publishing world does. Exist as an independent, not-for-profit publisher that always leans in the direction of art at a time when profit is all too often and all too sadly the measure of success in the world. So I'm asking, not just me, but the writers, the publishers, the publicists, the editorial team, the entire board member at Bellevue Literary Press, telling you that we cannot and we will not survive without you. So tonight, please make a generous donation to Bellevue Literary Press because we want you to be a part of this great family. We need you to be a part of this great house. And we hope that you'll believe in all the things we do. Thank you very much.
I first worked on a book with Erica Goldman in the 90s. And back then, I was an angry young man as opposed to an angry aging man. And in the book that we worked on, which was one of my first ones, Erica was very, very good about making what I thought of in that green state as a manuscript into one that somebody other than me and her might actually want to read. And she pulled me back from the precipice of being too much of an angry young man. And she did it in a way that almost no one else could have. I didn't know anybody else at the time who could have pulled me back from that without making me even angrier. So that's now ancient history, but then there was some more slightly less than ancient history, which is that when Erica was working at Freeman, I had an agent who didn't quite get another book that I had written, and I had a little bit more experience at this point. And so I just sent a chapter of it to Erica because I got the feeling that she would understand that this was a book that maybe somebody other than me might want to read. She understood that, and that book is The Power of Babel, which I dare say is one of my more popular books. I think it at least deserved an outing, and it was Erica who saw that. And more to the point, since then, for a very long time now, I've kept in touch with Erica at Bellevue, and the Bellevue operation, I would say that the adjective that comes to mind is just comforting for me. And so by the time Erica and I did Talking Back, Talking Black together, I was used to publishing with larger houses, and I could have, but I wanted to do another book with the truly comfortable editing experience that I knew I would have at Bellevue, and that's certainly what happened. And so Talking Back, Talking Black came out. Once again, Erica shepherded it very carefully into fruition, including making me be more specific about certain things that I was breezing past. And again, I tend to think, at least when the book is fresh out of my fingers, that it should be sacrosanct. I like it the way it is. That's the way we writers are. And Erica is very good at making me see beyond that without making me then privately tell my friends that I'm angry at the world. Nothing of the sort. And more to the point, with Talking Back, Talking Black, Erica and I went to a conglomeration of publishers and agents who were interested in books. And so I knew that with Bellevue, my book was not necessarily going to be obscure. It wasn't that people weren't going to know about it because it's a small press. By no means. Bellevue gets more and more out there every year. And I found that everything just went very well. The transition of the book into paperback, the nature of the publicity and what was required of it. It was a fine experience, and I intend to have it again. I highly recommend Bellevue Literary Press. Talking Back, Talking Black was one of my most memorable and especially most comfortable experiences. I give BLP my heartiest support.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for your support of Bellevue Literary Press. My name is Natalie Hodges, and I'm going to read an excerpt from my upcoming book, Uncommon Measure: Reflections on Music, Performance, and the Science of Time. Every night that year, before she put Aiden to bed, Mom would offer me her help, tell me to wake her up if she fell asleep and I needed her. I shouldn't have awakened her, those bitter, almost mornings when the house was still, those rare times when she didn't need to be anywhere but where she was, when no one was clamoring for her attention, battering her with yet another litany of needs. And yet, come midnight or 1 a.m., I inevitably found myself tiptoeing upstairs and into Aiden's room. Why I took such pains to be quiet in the moments before I woke her, I don't know, and reaching down to touch her shoulder. She slept so lightly that it never took much to wake her. My justifications were whispered, rushed, and many. This passage isn't going right. I can't get these double stops in tune. I can't hear if the phrasing makes sense from an audience perspective. Could you come listen and tell me if it sounds all right? I would wake her up under the guise of needing her help because I felt too guilty to say what I really meant. That I hated being alone in the dark. That I needed her to be adrift with me. I think I justified it to myself in part because I knew it made her happy that I played and played well. I wanted to show her how hard I was working and that I didn't take my lessons for granted. And, more than anything, to validate her sacrifice, feeling beholden even though I knew she had never asked that repayment of me. I guess I've never been able to help myself. I love her, and in loving her I define her as my mother, the woman who has devoted her life to my siblings and me. As I get older, it seems to me that trying to learn how to love somebody the right way, to give enough of yourself but never too much, is to discover the frightening asymmetry at the heart of love. Like a kaleidoscope that, twisted relentlessly in the hands of a child, establishes a crystalline moment of symmetry only to be broken again, changed to something new, the work of love lays bare the infirmity of the divide between past and future, self and other, you and I. Why do those symmetries, which ought to be so set in stone, break and reform and break again, and in doing so make selflessness and self-preoccupation impossible to tell apart from one another? Equality describes an external relationship between separate entities, between Asians and Caucasians, husbands and wives, parents and their children. In my mother's experience of assimilation, at least, there was never any point in discussing equality in relation to white people. It was more about scraping by, striking an impossible balance between making sure you didn't stand out enough to get picked on, and doing well enough that you weren't automatically passed over, cast aside. The fact that the children of so many Asian immigrants play classical music at a disproportionately high level, that they excel in a genre at the dusty peak of Western high art, one in which contemporary American culture is increasingly less interested, has made it an Asian thing, an Asian stereotype, a manifestation of that stubborn will to work that marks a certain kind of perceived inferiority. The performance of identity, especially that of a model minority, rarely, if ever, lends itself to notions of equality. In trying to play the part society has prescribed for you, you are inherently left at the mercy of the people who are watching, auditioning you for their way of life, evaluating whether or not you belong. Instead, it is symmetry, from the Greek symmetria, agreement in dimensions, due proportion, arrangement, that offers to my mind a more apt metaphor for assimilation, because symmetry describes the relationship of a single identity to itself. Every personal identity is an entity in flux, a constant negotiation of the multitude of more specific identities that it comprises and their myriad proportions to one another. Wife and mother, parent and child, Korean and American, each of us has the capacity to become a slightly different person, depending on where we are and whom we are with, in any given moment of interaction. The balance of who we are is determined by the symmetries and asymmetries of those identities, the relationship forged by their interplay between how others see us and how we see ourselves. Should she support our music or appease her husband? Should she be an Asian mother or an American one? Assimilation, perhaps more than any other crisis of identity, threatens to throw that balance out of whack. Its grief begins when you notice that the way others perceive you has begun to diverge from the way you see yourself. For my mother, that divergence was always palpable, in sidelong looks, in people moving away from her at the post office or the grocery store, in the man who slapped her across the face while she was walking down the street in Denver, her freshman year of college, screaming, "You dirty yellow thing, taking jobs away from good American people." Decades later, it wounded her identity as a mother when people asked her children if she was a tiger mother. How were we supposed to respond? She started all four of us in classical music at age 5. She was our first teacher, and she required that we practice every day. She wanted us to play so that we would learn how to work hard and discipline ourselves when undertaking a task, to help us get into good colleges, to give us a chance. How, then, am I to tell whoever asks this question that this wasn't the case, that all of this didn't make her a tiger mother, that what cancels out the stereotype is that she has loved classical music all her life, that she has known its great beauty and wanted us to know it too, when I cannot separate this answer from the fact that when you're an Asian person growing up in America, your choice to play and to love the violin is reduced almost automatically to the stereotype it is. In physics, asymmetry is defined as the preservation of a system under a given transformation. The replacement of particles with their oppositely charged antiparticles, say, or the inversion of their orientation in space so that right is swapped with left and vice versa. When all the workings of the system remain unaltered in spite of that change, its symmetry is said to be preserved, its integrity maintained. If they do not, the system's continuity is ruptured in a process known as symmetry breaking. Among the simplest examples of such transformations are space translation symmetry, which shifts a system's position in space, and time translation symmetry, which moves its operations to another place in time. Galileo's experiments on falling bodies can be recreated today, more than 400 years later, and the consistency of the results proves not only his original thesis, that acceleration due to gravity is the same for all objects regardless of mass, but the constancy of physical laws across time, the immutability of gravity. In instances of symmetry preservation, there is no discernible difference between before and after. Something fundamental about the system's spatial and temporal position has changed, yet the physics of the system stays the same. Is assimilation, then, the preservation of a symmetry, or its breaking? On one hand, moving across the world in order to begin life anew necessitates undergoing a monumental translation in space and language and time, a transcontinental shift from there to here, then to now. You are required to change yourself, to break symmetry with the past and with the person you used to be. In many cases, perhaps, the desire for such a break motivates immigration itself. But what it's hard to appreciate until you've arrived in your new country, until it's too late, is that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work or how successful you become, it doesn't really change how others see you, because the harder you try to transform yourself in order to fit in, the more you reveal yourself to be the outsider you always were. The very process of changing yourself, then, becomes an act of self-preservation. You're just trying to prove that you belong, to make yourself acceptable to your new country so that you can survive inside of it. More than anything, I think, my mother feared the time translation of her experience as an immigrant onto the lifetimes of her children, the possibility that we would have to endure the same uncertainty and degradation that she did, that her history would repeat itself. She wanted to break that symmetry at all costs. In this, she has succeeded. I prepared to audition for Juilliard while she, at my age, had waited tables at a Chinese restaurant after school. The calluses on my hands are of a finer point than hers, formed over years spent pressing fingertips to violin strings, a far cry from the bleach-soaked, hard-scrubbing, cold-cracked years that her hands have endured. Still, Being humiliated for doing it this way has made her hesitate, has made her question herself. She seems shy now, sometimes, and halting, so conscious always of how she must be perceived, including by her own children. "I don't want you to be timid like me," she told me once, with a rueful laugh. And even though I reassured her and threw my arms around her, it broke my heart to hear her say it. As afraid as I am of what my music cost her, to question that choice is to deny her the right to have made a choice, to have a conviction and volition of her own about how her life ought to be. And yet can I deny that in defending her, I am really being defensive about myself and all the ways I prevailed upon her, took advantage of her sacrifice, and was grateful, even happy, that she'd made it? When I tried miserably, haltingly, to tell her this, to get those feelings off my chest the year I woke her up almost every night to practice with me, she just smiled and shook her head, told me not to worry, that her job is to launch the four of you, to be the rocket booster, the thing that goes up with the rocket and propels it into space. What she didn't mention, yet implicit in her metaphor, is the fact that the rocket boosters, having given the last full measure of devotion at the upper limits of the atmosphere, must reverse their course and fall, spent, back to Earth.
Wow, thanks so much, John McWhorter, Natalie Hodges, and Andrew Crevack for sharing those really meaningful words with us this evening. I have to say it really makes such a difference, especially to me, to be able to see and hear these authors speaking in person. I think it gives just such resonance to their work. So thanks for being with us this evening. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, which is my wonderful board colleague, David Oshinski. So David is a historian and a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, and he's going to introduce Jerome Lowenstein, who is our special honoree this evening. So David, please take it away.
Hello, Jerry. This is your old friend, David. I've been given a few minutes to talk about you and your extraordinary work in medical humanities. But first, I want to bring you back to 2008. I think it's the first time we met, and I remember our first meeting very, very well. We talked about writing, and you told me that you had just finished a manuscript called Henderson's Equation. And you asked me if I would read it, and I said, of course I would. And the book was about Lawrence Henderson, a relatively well-known at the time, at the turn of the 20th century, physician, scientist, sociologist. But what you did in the book was to take two main characters, Henderson being one, and his assistant being the other, and they came from two very different worlds in the United States. Henderson was the Brahmin. He was Harvard educated. He was the ultimate Bostonian, and his assistant came from the Jewish ghettos of the Lower East Side, the immigrant Lower East Side. And it was basically how these two men tried to figure out the universe in a way that made sense to both of them. But what really struck me about the book was the fact that it was all written against the background of America in about 1920. And the research was impeccable. You were talking about the rise of fascism in Europe, the Sacco and Vanzetti case in the United States, immigration restriction, America as this country with enormous potential, but also all of these problems in terms of social class, science, and the like. And when I finished the book, I remember writing you a note, which you may have, I think, used for a blurb, in which I said, I'm no expert on novels, but I really do know fine writing. And this is it. It really was a simple tale with an enormously important message told as a story. And it really had a tremendous impact upon me. And I sort of gravitated to you as really a writer of real note. And then I came to learn over time that you were really, in some ways, with Marty Blazer and others, you were the brains and the founder of the BLR, the BLP. And you also had a lot to do with the LitMed database. And I don't want to embarrass you, but I will say that there were times when the LitMed database was on very shaky ground, and you were not only giving me great advice, but you were actually giving financial support through some of your own grant money, which is something I really never forgot. You had a sense of understanding that the humanities are extraordinarily important in medicine, that doctors grow by learning the humanities. They become more compassionate. They become more patient-centered. They have, in a sense, a larger slice of the world at their fingertips, and it's something that is really undervalued, I think, in medical education today. And because it is now gaining traction, certainly at NYU, it is because of the early work that you did and the support you have constantly given in this particular area. I want to say one other thing, a personal note. Every time I have had a family member at NYU Langone, Jerry has come to visit that person. And there was one incident in particular that my wife, Jane, reported to me that was so Jerry that I think I have to now tell it to you. What Jane said, Jane had her father in the hospital. He was pushing 90 years old at the time. This was a while ago. And he's sort of a cantankerous guy. He's difficult in many ways. And Jane was in a room, and interns were coming in and out, and residents and all kinds of hospital staff, and all kinds of tests being done and machines in the room. And Jerry came into the room, and according to Jane, Jerry first began to talk to Saul and to listen to Saul and to treat him as a patient who really knew something about his own diagnosis. And Jerry was the perfect listener, Jane said. And then Jerry took his stethoscope and put it to Saul's neck. And in a matter of moments, Jerry had the diagnosis, which turned out to be the proper one. When Jane told me the story, she had tears in her eyes, but to me, it was the perfect personification of Jerry as a physician who sort of understands that what patients tell you are important, to be patient, to listen to them, and then you make the diagnosis. And what I want to say, Jerry, simply in closing, other than thank you for everything you have done for me, for medical humanities, and for my family, is that at some point in time, I'm going to be up in Langone in some room worrying about some disease, and I know you're going to come to visit me. And what I'd like to say most of all is bring your stethoscope.
Thank you, David. It's hard to follow David Oshinski's introduction, and I'm tempted to just take his words, smile, sit down, and listen to the rest of this program. But the central focus of this event is to celebrate the Bellevue Literary Press and to elaborate on its many accomplishments. The BLP, now an independent nonprofit, had its origins in the NYU School of Medicine. I want to give a bit of history, which will help link my background as a full-time member of the Department of Medicine with my role as the founding publisher of the BLP. There are three important people in this story. The history can probably be traced back to my early meeting with Homer Smith in the 1950s. I started medical school in 1953. In 1952, Homer Smith published his book, Man and His Gods. It carried an endorsement by Albert Einstein. I read his book after having tea with a faculty meeting with Professor Smith, and I remember being impressed with the fact that his interests were so far-ranging. It left me with an impression. The next person that was very important in my development, I think, was Lewis Thomas. Thomas was the chief of medicine when I was on the House staff. He was a prolific writer and an outstanding popular science essayist. He wrote monthly essays that were published in the New England Journal and ultimately led to the collection of a book called Lives of a Cell. He had remarkable insight into human disease. He taught me a lot about going beyond the signs and symptoms to much broader interests in illness. His book, Lives of a Cell, is still valuable for students today. The third person would be Jerry Weissman. Weissman was a renowned NYU rheumatologist, but not limited to NYU. He was a marvelous essayist and a science popularizer. His book, Galileo's Gout, was BLP's first published book, and we went on to publish 3 more of his books. Jerry died in 2019. We had planned to honor his life and his work at last year's BLP Fête, but we were forced to cancel that by the earliest signs of the pandemic in New York City. I first tried my hand at writing in 1991 when I wrote a book trying to explain acid-base physiology through transport physiology. It was moderately successful, but it left me with a real taste for writing. I went on to write a novel about Lawrence Henderson, who himself was an outstanding acid-base physiologist and a systems theorist at Harvard in the early 20th century. I worked on the book for 5 years. I learned a lot about acid-base physiology, a lot about Lawrence Henderson, but the book found no interest among editors or publishers. I was stuck after 5 years. I went to Jerry Weissman and asked his advice. He recommended that I contact Erica Goldman. Erica read the manuscript and made a few suggestions. We met 4 times over the following year, usually over wine and pasta at a local restaurant. Each time, Erica asked probing questions about what I thought about Henderson and his ideas. And this led me to rewrite parts of the book, and ultimately, it saw publication. Around the time of our last meeting, aware that I had served as the editor of the Bellevue Literary Review, and that I had contact with many writers through that contact, Erica pitched the idea of founding a literary book press within the School of Medicine. Over the ensuing months, the idea she planted in my mind took root, and with the support of Marty Blazer, who was the chief of medicine, I reached the conviction that Erica Goldman would be a perfect editor. I must admit that I had little knowledge of the world of not-for-profit publishing when we began. That's almost 15 years ago. But I'll tell you, it has been an incredible learning experience for me. Erica had a long history of working with mainstream publishers, but her goal, as she explained to me, was to publish works of very high quality rather than commercial appeal. She passed each submission that she chose to me for my approval. When we accepted a book for publication, it was clear that she worked closely with each author to develop what she saw as the strength of the author's vision. It is Erica's expertise and devotion that have brought BLP to its present place of prominence. The result can be seen in BLP's accomplishments. First, and most strikingly, a Pulitzer Prize in fiction by Paul Harding. The book is called Thinkers, and it's a wonderful read. As founding publisher of the Bellevue Literary Press, I'm proud of our achievements. I truly believe that Erica Goldman should share fully this award that you've given to me. I hope you'll support us and we can continue fulfilling our mission of engaging two cultures of the arts and the sciences in a rich and fruitful conversation that honors the legacy of Homer Smith, of Lewis Thomas, and Gerald Weissman through the books we publish. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I hope you're having a great time. I'm Gloria Jacobs, and I am honored to be the president of the board of Bellevue Literary Press. First off tonight, I want to thank you, David, for such a wonderful tribute to Jerry, reminding us how important he is to so many people and places, not just BLP. And of course, thank you, Jerry, for being you, which means being a stalwart supporter of Bellevue Literary Press, and a passionate believer in the arts and the sciences, and that what I think of as an exciting Venn diagram where they overlap. So in honor of your extraordinary life, as well as your exceptional efforts to help BLP remain the brilliant, drowning in awards publisher that it is, I am delighted to present you with the first honorary BLP plaque. And if you hold on a minute, I will pick it up and show you. Here it is. It is by the renowned ceramicist, Christopher Russell. And if you look, you will see a B, an L, and a P. BLP. There you go. I'm sorry that has to be a virtual presentation, by the way, but I hope to see you very soon and to be able to give that to you in person. So tonight, I hope you've really had an opportunity to see what a treasure BLP is. I don't know about you, but I find that the more time I spend on my computer and my phone, the more desperate I am to read a book, to use different parts of my brain for thinking and seeing. And if I am reading a book, I want it to be also to transport me to new worlds, to new ways of thinking, and to use creative, innovative language to get me there. And can I say that those are criteria that commercial houses rarely use in choosing a book to publish. And those are criteria that Bellevue Literary Press always uses in choosing a book to publish. Now, I know that we're all asked to give a lot these days, but can I ask that in your many pathways of generosity, you consider doing something for BLP Press? Your support means that you, as a reader, a student somewhere, someone in a library, will have the chance to read a book that will open their minds to entirely new worlds, and that could not be more important than it's ever been. So, if you can give a little extra tonight, I'm very happy to say that that little extra can become a lot extra. The BLP board has offered to provide a matching grant, and that will expand and enlarge anything you give tonight, just like reading a BLP book will expand and enlarge your mind. So it's very easy. Just go to blpress.org/fet, and thank you for your generosity. And now I would like to introduce the guitarist Marc Ribeau, who is, his bio is so extraordinary, I can't get through it all in time for you to hear him. But I would just like to say that one of his most recent albums is called Songs of Resistance, and it features Tom Waite and Michelle Ndegeocello, among others, along with him. And here is Marc Ribeau. And thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Marc, for that beautiful musical gift. Marc Ribeau, gorgeous.
Fantastic.
I've had a great evening, Andrea. How about you?
Oh, it's been so wonderful. It only would have been better if we were together, but you know, we're still here in each other's presence. So that's fantastic.
Thanks to
and your companion. You have a lovely companion with you.
Thanks to Ciboulette, who has been stalwart and supportive as well. Thanks to our board, to our authors, to everyone who has been with us tonight and who's with us always. We couldn't do what we do without you. So
that's so true. And likewise, Erica, we couldn't do what we do without you and Laura Hart and everyone at the press who keeps us steady on. So thanks to all those efforts. All right, so have a little toast.
Cheers to everyone tonight. Thanks for your support.
Okay, bravo. So be safe and be well, and we'll see you all very soon. Bye-bye.
I'm in person.
Yes, good night.
Good night.